Let's head to the United States now, and joining me live is Dr. Patrick Schoettmer, Seattle University Associate Professor of American Politics. Doctor, great to have you on the program again. Is this Joe Biden also sending a little message to those in that part of the world?
I think it's Joe Biden sending a message to people in that part of the world about where he stands on the issue. I also think it's probably him sending a message to voters in the U.S., especially in the state of Michigan, which just had its primary elections on Tuesday.
And tell us about that, because he won, but there was some controversy surrounding his victory, and Donald Trump, as expected, won in Michigan as well.
So both major candidates ran into some turbulence, we might say, in the Michigan primary. Trump, for his part, still managed to underperform what we would expect for a major party leading candidate. But President Biden ran into a lot of opposition where voters were voting non-committed rather than supporting his renomination, particularly in Michigan's southwest part, in Washtenaw County, where the University of Michigan is, showing that he might be struggling with young voters, and in Wayne County, particularly in the city of Dearborn, which has a majority Arab American population.
Do you think that those people would go non-committed in a general election, or this is a protest early?
For the younger voters, I think the question is whether or not they're going to vote for President Biden. I don't think there's any real serious concern that they would vote for President Trump. But in a state that is closely contested and that's important to the outcome as Michigan, that could matter. As for Arab American voters, particularly given Biden's early enthusiasm for Israel and what they've seen as foot dragging when it comes to pushing for a permanent ceasefire, I think there is a real risk that you could see Arab Americans decline to vote, and particularly Arab American Christians who were traditionally a Republican voting group before the year 2000. Before 2000.
Trump disqualified from the Illinois ballot?
He had been disqualified by a judge. It wasn't the Illinois Supreme Court, so there would certainly be more appeals there. But the idea about disqualification on ballots more generally is before the Supreme Court as well. So I think that the real verdict on that we'll have to wait to see what the Supreme Court rules.
Some experts are now starting to say, because it was almost the standard line every time Donald Trump either walked in a courtroom or there was something mentioned about him, he'd get a sugar hit, he would get, even more support from his base. It is starting to take its toll in the eyes of many.
Yeah, well, the court appearances certainly helped him with his political base, which has helped him to secure renomination with the Republican Party. So that has redounded to his advantage. The problem is that these court appearances don't sit nearly as well with independent and moderate voters who he's going to need to win the general election. So while it has been beneficial to him thus far, once he's locked up the nomination, these repeated court cases are going to prove to be a little bit more of a drag, and particularly when coupled with decisions like we saw in New York, where his business interests were fined heavily for having engaged in fraud, and the possibility that the Republican Party will help him fund part of this settlement payment that he needs to make to the state of New York for the fraud charges. The concern there is that it could drain resources that Republicans will need not only to win the election, presidential election, but more importantly to help reelect Republicans to the House and to the Senate, where they hope to retain control of the House and gain control of the Senate.
I saw somewhere in an article that GoFundMe page that was set up by one of his supporters would probably cover the interest on what he owes, about a weekly payment.
Yeah, so they managed to raise over $1 million for him on the GoFundMe page, which again shows that there is a very enthusiastic base of support for him in the small donor community. But the size of the settlement against him, over $500 million, and the interest that it accrues as he drags his feet on actually providing that money, it won't go very far.
No, absolutely. And McConnell resigning?
So I think this is a convergence of a couple different stories at the same time. Uh, Leader McConnell had been suffering a number of health issues, especially over the past year, and some were concerned that there were some cognitive issues emerging. He is, like many of the leaders in the Washington these days, in his 80s. But there's also the political concern of him being increasingly out of step, him being more of a Republican in the Ronald Reagan model, whereas the new Republican Party is more in the Donald Trump model. And the animosity between McConnell and Trump was becoming an increasingly large story in the story of the Senate, and that's a story that a lot of Republicans wanted to move past. So, for both health reasons and for also political reasons, I think he's come to see that after this November, his time in leading of the Senate was probably a good time to bring it to a close.
Great to have you on the show again. We'll do it again soon.
All right, I look forward to it.